For more than 40 years, many Canadians wrapped up their day this way.
CTV National News with Lloyd Robertson.
With him, Lloyd Robertson. Before the cable news channels, before blogs and Twitter, there was Lloyd, helping to make sense of your world every night. First here at the CBC.
And here is the latest film of riots from Washington earlier this afternoon.
And then at another network. I can't quite remember the name.
Good evening. Lloyd Robertson joins us tonight for CTV News, and he couldn't have come on a busier news day.
Lloyd was the longest-serving national anchor in Canadian television history, and when he was inducted into Canada's Walk of Fame in 2007, it was another news icon, Walter Cronkite, who paid tribute to him.
One of Canada's great newsmen, Lloyd Robertson.
Lloyd was witness to some of the biggest moments of the last half-century, from Trudeau-mania and the Marathon of Hope, from triumph to tragedy, always ending his nightly newscast with his iconic sign-off.
And that's the kind of day it's been.
And now Lloyd is sharing his inside stories from the newsroom. It's in a new memoir called The Kind of Life It's Been.
Please welcome to the program, Lloyd Robertson. What a real pleasure.
Thank you, George. It's great to be here.
How are things?
And congratulations on your new show.
Thank you very much.
Your new hour.
As thinking about being a journalist and an anchor, oftentimes you have to kind of be the guy that we trust, but not the guy that we know an awful lot about. It's key to impartiality. True. What's it like to then share your story?
Well, I found that pretty difficult, George, because, you know, I grew up in an era when you didn't talk about yourself. It was considered impolite, rude. Right. Don't bring attention to yourself. So all of those years, I was an observer. I was at the center of things, but I was watching other people do things. Mm-hmm. And finally, people started saying to me, as I'm sure they were saying to you, you got to write a book, you got to write a book. Mm-hmm. And what I had to do was sort of, because I was really reluctant to talk about my mother and some of those early things, what I had to do was move out of myself, really, and look at myself, observe myself as a story, you know, rather than being in the center observing somebody else.
You know, you mentioned your mother. I mean, you're pretty honest in this book. Your mother struggled with severe mental illness, is that?
She had a lot of things wrong with her. She had obsessive-compulsive disorder. She had what nowadays would be called bipolar. She was extremely paranoid.
At a time when people didn't really understand it.
Well, no, you couldn't talk about it. I mean, I couldn't have kids to the house. I couldn't tell them about her. And if, you know, parents of my friends would know that my mother was sick, they would ask, how is she? And I wouldn't tell them whether it was cancer or whatever it was. And they eventually caught on that it was mental illness. Then they stopped talking about it altogether. It was a no-go zone.
Just growing up in that life, I mean, did you experience some of the worst of it? Did you have to deal with some pretty serious things as a kid?
Well, she had a lobotomy when I was 14 years old. It was pretty crazy up until that time because she was in and out of hospital a lot, and I remember walking into those wards of the hospital. And I'll never forget those images of, you know, people in catatonic states, people walking along, talking to themselves quite openly in the hallways, the screams coming from the locked wards. And these are images that stick with you all of your life. And for me, what it's done is it's brought to me a lifelong need to understand the mysteries of mental illness. You know, my mother loved me, I'm sure of that, and I know that she would like to have been a better mother to her son. But she could not do it. And what it did was take so much away from this woman. She couldn't be a parent. She couldn't be a part of her community. She couldn't really get out and do things on her own because she was afraid of everything. She was paranoid about life. So I saw all of that, and that marks you for life. And you worry yourself about some of the genes surfacing in your system.
Has there ever been a story that was just too difficult to read, or was more difficult than another?
There were a couple of them, actually, George. There was, I'll never forget this one, the day of the memorial service in Ottawa after 9/11. And about 100,000 Canadians showed up on the Hill, and the silence that day and the mourning, it was palpable. You could see how those people were feeling. And also the Terry Fox Marathon, you know. He touched me very deeply, that kid, because I followed his story across the country. And he was just an average Canadian kid, you know. And I think what it was, as I say in the book, he meant something to us because that was the kind of response that a kid next door to you would have. he gets cancer, he's young. Why me? Why me? Right. We all say that, you know, why me? He said it, and he did something about it.
You know, we rarely actually take questions from other people in this, but people in the audience want to ask you a question. I have a question from a young man over there.
Sure.
Go ahead, sir. You have a question for Lloyd?
Well, I was just wondering about some advice.
I say, by the way, on page 71 or 72, that this kid, you know, Churchill, Manitoba, 1970, he's there. It's one of the first national reporting jobs he's done on the radio service of the CBC, and he comes up and he's got the big voice. You know. And I thought, well, you know, this kid's he's going to be going places. As exotic and hauntingly beautiful as Churchill is, I knew he wouldn't be there very long.
What's your question for Mr. Robertson?
Before I ask the question, let me just tell you, this is one of the nicest people in our business. Not only a great journalist, great anchor, but a truly nice person. And Lloyd's, you know, I've known Lloyd for over 40 years. He's been great to me and to a lot of other people in broadcasting. But having said that,
thank you, Peter.
What's the secret to longevity?
Well, you're getting to know something about that. As a matter of fact, Peter, I think you're heading for 25 years, which is an unheard of number in the CBC anchor chair.
Yes.
Because when I was at the CBC, I mean, they were gone on an executive whim in a couple of years. If somebody didn't like you, boom, you were out. Peter has, what is it, 22, 23 years now?
What is it now?
Good for you.
24.
24, right. So there you are. Yeah. He's going to be, he will be the longest serving CBC anchor. In fact, he is now. You know,
How do you feel about that, Peter?
So there you are.
He's still young.
Longevity, there you go.
The trick is to just be like Peter.
Be like Peter.
You know?
Don't tell them about it, Lloyd. Don't tell them.
Great to see you, Peter.
Page 158, by the way, I wrap up my feelings about the CBC, and I do say that it's part of our national fabric. We need it. We will always need a strong national public broadcaster in this country.
But when you were watching the Jay Leno-Conan O'Brien fiasco a couple of years ago, could you relate because of the thing between you and Keith Morrison?
I did, actually, but it was a very different situation because in my case, I handed the job over to him.
You were at 18 years and said, I want to do 2 more, right?
Well, yeah.
See, and I heard the story that you were gracious enough to say, I'll go, but then that they were pushing early and suddenly you don't mess with Lloyd.
Well, what I say is that I felt, and there was some evidence to this, as I point to in the book, that they wanted to get on earlier. They wanted to move earlier. And I felt, you know, I'm a Scottish background, you know, stubborn. I said, hey, a deal is a deal, you know, this far, no further. And is that an elbows up attitude? I suppose it is. But, you know this business, George. You got to protect yourself.
You sure do. We'll be right back.
Oh, Lloyd better watch out, because also coming up, Pat Thornton and the panel with their take on the news.
Oh, just reading the news on my phone.
Are you reading about the pending NHL strike? Oh, I hope that doesn't happen, right? Love hockey.
That is happening.
It is?
Yeah.
Did you hear about Britney Spears shaving her head?
Okay, that was a long time.
Also a long time ago. Gotta catch up.
I'm Lloyd Robertson. And I'm Earl Cannonbear. And this is the SCTV News. Excuse me for a moment, please. Earl, what are you doing? Well, thanks for asking, Floyd. I'm having my dinner. It is 6 o'clock, the dinner hour, and I know that many of our viewers like to eat while watching the news, so I invited myself for dinner, so to speak. Hope you don't mind.
Dr. Lloyd Robertson here. So there's obviously Eugene Levy and Joe Flaherty on SCTV. So Lloyd Robertson, that's the greatest homage to of all time, isn't it?
It was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I really enjoyed that. And of course, I met those people a lot. Yeah. And I was on with them a couple of times.
What's that moment when you first realized that they were spoofing you in a way? They were spoofing.
Well, you know what? It was fun, because I think it's fun to be spoofed. Yeah. And in that particular case, Joe Flaherty, he was marvelous, and a couple of times we did a stick together. just like you and I would do, you know, in the same kind of situation. And I remember Earl Camembert. Now, do people know I trust that was Earl Cameron?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
would hope.
Oh yeah, Earl Cameron, of course, was an iconic name back in the '60s for CBC. But we had a lot of fun with that.
Tell me the truth. When you were on at 11 o'clock and I was on at 11 o'clock, in your commercial break or our news clip, did you turn and watch what we were doing?
George, we watch you all the time.
He knows that he had to say that. So when you come up with your tagline, your sign off, you know, your Ron Burgundy moment, your Stay Classy San Diego, and that's the kind of day it's been.
Yeah.
Do you like?
Good night, San Diego.
Do you try that stuff? Do you maybe I should do this one? Have you really? Do you plan
that one I did try out for a while,
yeah.
and it caught on, and I liked it, and some other people liked it. Yeah. So I did it for. I started in the '90s. Year 2000, I decided I'd change it. And immediately there was a response from people who had gotten used to it. So I had to go back to it. So I continued right to the end. But that's the kind of day it's been. And that's where the title of the book came from, The Kind of Life It's Been.
So great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, George.
Pleasure.
Pleasure.
Lloyd Robertson, everybody. Good thanks, Canada. The guy that we trust, but not the guy that we know an awful lot about. It's key to impartiality. What's it like to then share your story?
Well, I found that pretty difficult, George, because, you know, I grew up in an era when you didn't talk about yourself. It was considered impolite, rude. Right. Don't bring attention to yourself. So all of those years, I was an observer. I was at the center.
And then at another network. I can't quite remember the name.
Good evening. Lloyd Robertson joins us tonight for CTV News, and he couldn't have come on a busier news day.
Lloyd was the longest-serving national anchor in Canadian television history, and when he was inducted into Canada's Walk of Fame in 2007, it was another news icon, Walter Cronkite, who paid tribute to him.
One of Canada's great newsmen.
Please welcome to the program, Lloyd Robertson. What a real pleasure.
Thank you, George. It's great to be here.
How are things?
And congratulations on your new show.
Thank you very much.
Your new hour.
As the thing about being a journalist and an anchor, oftentimes you have to kind of be...
Lloyd Robertson.
Lloyd was witness to some of the biggest moments of the last half-century, from Trudeau-mania and the Marathon of Hope, from triumph to tragedy, always ending his nightly newscast with his iconic sign-off.
And that's the kind of day it's been.
And now Lloyd is sharing his inside stories from the newsroom. It's in a new memoir called The Kind of Life It's Been. For more than 40 years, many Canadians wrapped up their day this way.
CTV National News with Lloyd Robertson.
With him, Lloyd Robertson. Before the cable news channels, before blogs and Twitter, there was Lloyd, helping to make sense of your world every night. First here at the CBC.
And here is the latest film of riots from Washington earlier this afternoon.